Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're going deep on, well, it's kind of heavy, but important. How we deal with the really tough stuff.
Trauma.
Tragedy. Yeah, exactly. And the role that therapy and even art plays in all that. We're using Stephen K. Levine's book, Trauma, Tragedy, Therapy, the Arts and Human Suffering as our guide here.
Great choice.
If you're the type who wants to understand these big ideas quickly and fully, well, you're in the right place. No skimming the surface here.
Not at all. Levine brings together so many different threads. I mean, he looks at philosophy from Plato and Aristotle all the way to Kant, Heidegger, Nietzsche.
Wow, the heavy hitters.
Right. And then adds in the psychology side, Freud, Jung, Lacan, then even Winnicott, Hillman.
So we're talking a really broad scope here.
Absolutely. And he ties it all into artistic movements, modernism, postmodernism, even the impact of historical events, especially the Holocaust.
Okay, so big picture. What's the core question we're trying to answer in this deep dive?
How can the arts help us truly understand and respond to the suffering that's just part of life?
Because it's inevitable, right?
Levine's point, exactly. And he proposes a really intriguing shift, moving away from just being stuck in a victim mindset towards actually engaging creatively with those tough experiences.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something that big?
Well, Levine starts by sort of critiquing how we usually approach trauma in psychology.
Interesting. So he's not just accepting the status quo.
Nope. He actually suggests that the field of psychotherapy itself has almost become, I don't know, traumatized by the idea of trauma.
Traumatized. Now that's a twist. How so?
He's saying this intense focus can lead to a sort of hypervigilance about trauma in therapy settings. Like everything is seen through that lens.
Ah, I see. So every problem gets traced back to some past trauma.
Yeah, almost like it's the root cause of all suffering.
What's the risk with that approach, though?
Well, the danger is we might overlook other crucial aspects of human suffering. It could also make therapists, narrow their approach too much.
Not leaving enough room for other ways to connect with the client.
Right. So Levine is saying we need to go beyond this idea of trauma just being a repetition of the past.
And that's where the arts come in.
Exactly. He argues we need to bring in the power of imagination, the transformative potential of art, into how we think about and work with trauma.
So it's not just about fixing what's broken in the past, but also about creating something new moving forward.
Precisely. And that leads us to one of Levine's central concepts, poiesis.
Poiesis. Now, I remember that from Aristotle, right? Knowing by making.
You got it. And it's different from just thinking about something or even taking action. It's about bringing something new into being.
And Levine ties this to expressive arts therapy.
Totally. He sees poiesis as the foundation of that approach. It's about actively engaging with art as a way to understand and work through difficult experiences. It's a different kind of knowing than just talking about them.
It's interesting because he also connects poiesis to mimesis, which is often thought of as, imitation, even copying.
Right, but he's not talking about just mindlessly repeating things. When Levine links poiesis with mimesis, it's about recognizing that even in repetition, there's space for creativity, for new meaning to emerge.
So it's like variations on a theme.
More like taking something familiar and reshaping it, transforming it.
Now, Heidegger, the philosopher, also has a perspective on poiesis that Levine brings in.
Heidegger saw poiesis as like this fundamental human capacity. He believed that through the act of making, we actually create our understanding of the world around us.
Whoa. So we're not just passively observing the world, we're actively shaping our experience of it.
That's it. And crucially, Heidegger thought poiesis is also how truth is revealed, what he called aletheia, a kind of uncovering of what was hidden before.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this connects back to art and therapy. So how did Heidegger see a work of art then?
He thought it embodies this tension between world, which is the meaning we create, and earth, which is like the raw material of our experiences, sensations, feelings.
And art shows us the truth of that messy sensory experience.
Exactly. It's not just about pretty pictures. It's about revealing something real about how we experience and understand the world.
And then Levine takes this idea and applies it to therapy itself.
Yep. He suggests that therapy, at its core, can also be seen as an act of poiesis. The therapist isn't there to fix the client, but to help them uncover their own truth.
Through a creative process.
Exactly. It's about facilitating, not dictating.
And then Hillman's concept of soul-making comes into play, too.
Right. For Hillman, soul-making happens through engaging with images, through imagination. It's not just about fixing what's broken, but about actively shaping who you are, becoming more fully yourself.
This is so fascinating. And then there's this idea Levine introduces, a fragmented totality. What's that all about?
That's a way to think about the self that acknowledges, how fragmented our experiences often are. Memories, emotions,
Mm.
they don't always fit neatly together.
Life is messy, right?
Yeah. But Levine's point is, we can still find a sense of wholeness, of meaning, through expressive acts, even while embracing that fragmentation. It's like taking the broken pieces and creating something new from them.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, Levine also gets into this whole dynamic between order and chaos in both therapy and art. He brings in Rudolf Arnheim, who emphasized order, right?
Yep. Arnhem was big on that. Order, balance, structure. He was heavily influenced by Gestalt psychology, which emphasizes how we naturally perceive patterns and forms.
But Levine is more open to, let's say, a little bit of messiness.
Definitely. He's not afraid of disarray, of the unexpected. He sees potential in that, too. It's almost like there's a creative tension between Arnheim's emphasis on order and Levine's embrace of the chaotic.
So how did Arnheim see the law of simplicity playing out in art?
He argued that we tend to simplify what we see, organize it into the simplest forms possible. But artists often introduce complexity to communicate something deeper, to challenge our perception.
So it's deliberate, not just randomness.
Exactly. And Arnheim believed that art was primarily directed toward expressing universal truths, not just individual emotions. He actually had a somewhat critical view of overly emotional art.
Interesting. And of course, postmodernism comes along and challenges this whole idea of a stable, centered world, a stable self.
Right. Postmodernism throws everything into question, including those fixed points of reference. It forces us to confront ambiguity, multiplicity.
And this is where Winnicott comes in with his concepts of formlessness and transitional space.
Yep. For Winnicott, these were crucial for both creativity and therapy. He thought it was important to allow for a kind of unstructured space, a space where things can emerge without being forced into a predetermined order.
So not rushing to impose order on the chaos.
Exactly. That can actually be counterproductive, but sometimes you need to let things be messy for a while.
Especially in therapy, it sounds like.
Right. Play, art. These can be forms of formlessness that allow for a temporary unraveling, a kind of deconstruction that ultimately leads to new understanding.
I love that. It reminds me of that anecdote Levine shares about working with an artist who described how they perceive natural forms.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one. It shows how we already perceive forms in the world, and the artist takes those and transforms them, reshapes them to create something new while still maintaining that connection to what's real.
Speaking of reshaping, Levine also talks about this idea of decentering in expressive arts therapy.
Decentering is about shifting your perspective, moving away from your usual point of view. In therapy, it can help clients get some distance from their problems, to see things in a new light.
And art itself can be inherently decentering.
Absolutely. It can pull us out of our everyday routines, our usual ways of thinking and seeing. That's where the magic happens.
Okay, let's tackle mimesis again. Levine says we need to move beyond a simple, literal understanding of it, particularly in trauma theory.
Right. If we just see mimesis as a literal reenactment of the trauma, it can actually trap us in that repetitive cycle, mirroring the problem without offering a way out.
So where does this concept of mimesis come from originally?
It actually goes all the way back to the arts, especially in Plato's dialogues. Interestingly, while Plato initially presents mimesis as imitation, when he talks about poetry and drama, it becomes more about performance.
Ah, so it's not just about copying. It's about embodying the story, bringing it to life.
Exactly. It's not a literal repetition of the past, but an enactment of a story in the present moment.
And there's a playful element to it too, right?
Yes, that playful, ludic quality is key. It's like the world becomes a stage, and we're all performers in a way.
That's a beautiful image. It reminds me of how Levine connects this to the themes of tragedy and what he calls the art of despair. He talks about the Dionysian acceptance of the interplay between creation and destruction.
The Dionysian perspective embraces that cyclical nature of life, things constantly coming into being and passing away. It raises the question of whether we can still find meaning, even a kind of blessing in suffering.
Especially in the context of the Holocaust, that question takes on even more weight.
Absolutely. And post-Holocaust art often goes beyond simply affirming life. It tries to confront and express the disaster without attempting to resolve or overcome it through simple affirmations.
Levine gives the example of Susan Sontag directing Waiting for Godot in Sarajevo during the war.
Powerful example. Here's a play where nothing happens, the character they're waiting for never arrives. And for the people in Sarajevo, trapped under siege, It must have been a chilling reflection of their own reality.
Waiting for help that never came.
Right. It was an acknowledgement of their suffering without offering any easy answers or comforting resolutions.
Which brings us to Beckett's concept of an art of despair.
Beckett's work confronts that deep despair, the immense longing we feel, but it doesn't provide the traditional catharsis, the emotional release of classic tragedy.
So, no happy ending, no sense of closure.
Not in the conventional sense,
Yeah.
but there's something powerful in that unflinching honesty.
And Levine connects this to Kierkegaard's perspective on the aesthetic life.
Yeah, Kierkegaard saw the aesthetic life, focused on pleasure and beauty, as ultimately leading to a sense of despair. But he also saw that despair as a potential turning point towards a more ethical, meaningful way of being.
But Beckett seems to choose to stay within the aesthetic, even while embracing that despair.
Exactly. He sees it as an obligation to express, even when there seems to be nothing left to say.
Wow, that's profound. Finally, Levine tackles the whole issue of how we even research imagination in expressive arts therapy. He questions the very idea of what research means in this context.
He challenges the assumption that we can just apply traditional scientific methods to something as complex as human imagination.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that a lot of research in this field actually lacks the very thing it's trying to study, imagination.
So how do we approach it differently?
He talks about the energetic nature of imagination, how it's dynamic, full of life. To understand it, we need a way of thinking that's equally energetic, equally imaginative.
It can't just be dry, analytical logic.
Right. We need to engage our own imagination to truly grasp what's going on.
And he brings in this historical debate, the Methodinstrate, between the natural and human sciences.
Yeah, that's about the fundamental differences in how we study the natural world versus human experience. Levine's point is that we can't just assume that the methods used to study physics or biology will work when we're dealing with something as complex as human creativity.
He also points out that in the human sciences, the researcher is never truly objective. We always influence what we're studying.
Exactly. He uses the example of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in physics, how the act of observation itself affects the phenomenon being observed. So it's not about pretending to be completely neutral, but about recognizing our own role in the research process.
And embracing that subjectivity.
Yes, it's not a weakness, it's an opportunity to bring our own passion, our own imagination into the research.
That makes sense. He also makes a distinction between aesthetics and poiesis when talking about research. Why is that important?
Well, aesthetics often focuses on the finished product, how we perceive a work of art. But poiesis emphasizes the act of creation, the process of making. By focusing on poiesis in research, we shift our attention to the artist, to the experience of art making itself.
So it's not just about analyzing the end result, it's about understanding the creative process.
Exactly. It's about seeing art as a way of knowing, a form of building, which is like self-formation, through creative expression.
I love that. Finally, Levine explores the relationship between poiesis and praxis, art and action in the world. He brings in Arendt and a bank, who make a distinction between the two.
Right. They see poiesis as a kind of technical making, based on a model, while praxis is about ethical and political action in the public sphere aimed at the common good.
So they see them as separate realms.
They're critical of this tendency to apply a model of technical control to how we understand political action. But Levine, drawing on Heidegger again, offers a different perspective. Heidegger saw poiesis not just as technical production, but as a way in which truth comes into being. It's about revealing new possibilities, not just imitating existing forms.
So it's a kind of discovery.
Exactly. And Levine argues that without the qualities of poiesis, imagination, playfulness, spontaneity, joy, our actions in the world, our praxis, can become rigid, ineffective.
We need that creative spark to truly make a difference.
Absolutely. He even points out that even philosophical texts like Plato's dialogues have a kind of mimetic quality in how they present ideas dramatically. It's like even thinking itself can be a form of performance.
That's fascinating. So to sum it all up, it sounds like Levine is making a powerful case for the arts through the lens of poiesis as a vital way to engage with trauma and tragedy. It's not about denying suffering, but about finding creative ways to respond to it and find meaning in our messy, often fragmented lives.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the power of creativity to help us heal, to grow, and to make sense of the world around us.
It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive. And for you listening, we encourage you to think about these ideas: poiesis, mimesis, the interplay of order and chaos, the art of despair, and how they might offer new perspectives on your own experiences and the human condition as a whole.
This is really just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in Levine's work.
And here's a final question to ponder. Can embracing what Levine calls the incompleteness of our experience actually open up new possibilities for action and lead to a deeper affirmation of life, even in the face of ongoing challenges? We hope this deep dive has inspired you to keep thinking, keep exploring, and keep creating. Thanks for joining us,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.